Welcome back to the channel, guys. It's been a long time since I put out a tournament recap video. It's been a long time since I've recorded any kind of video in general. I've been really slacking on this YouTube game in the first half of this year, but that all changes now. It feels good to be back in the booth. I'm going to be putting out a bunch of recap videos of basically select games from every over-the-board tournament I've played so far this year, of which there have been quite a few. In preparation for the biggest one so far, which is going to be the World Open, which I'm playing later this week. So yeah, let's get to it. The last video I recorded was my final 2 rounds of the Charlotte Open, which I finished with 4 out of 7. Damn, that was a long time ago. That was end of December, 6 months ago. And I didn't play another tournament until mid-February. Mid-February, I played the U.S. Amateur Team East, otherwise known as the World Amateur Team. This is actually one of the rare team competitions in the U.S. It's a very big tournament. Not as big this year because of it was still, pandemic was still kind of undergoing at the time. This is actually the last tournament that I've played in where masks were required. And I played in this tournament many, many years. From the point where I was a kid, like playing with a bunch of other kids from my chess school team, where we were like, bottom beaters, like playing on the bottom boards almost every round. This time, though, I had a pretty nice team. I was actually the 3rd board with a rating of about 2,080. Our last board was about 2,000, but our second board was 2,150, and our first board was actually about 2,350, a FIDE Master. So we had a pretty stacked team, averaged just around, what was our average? I think like 2,100 or so, or maybe mid 2,000, something like that. But anyway, strongest team I've ever been a part of. So we were definitely pretty ambitious. Obviously, there's other very strong teams, like there's teams with Grandmasters, IMs, etc. But anyway, opening day of this tournament, I won my first game against a kid about high 1900s. It was a very long, tough game, like grinded him out in this end game. Then the second game, I actually drew against this kid who was like barely 1800, like had a good position, and I kind of just made one little oversight, and he just, it wasn't like he was winning, but he totally killed my advantage, and I wasn't able to win. But what I want to focus on mainly in this video is the 2 games I played on the second day of this tournament. It was a 3-day event. These, I think, were my 2 best games, 2 most instructive. So the first one, this is already round 3, second day of the tournament. We are actually on board 1 at this point. Our team won both rounds, and we're playing on board 1 against a very strong team, like one of the highest rated teams in the tournament by average rating. FM on board 1, National Master on board 2. I was playing their 3rd board, obviously. He's about low 2100s. And the funny thing was, when the pairings got put out, I saw that he's mainly a Najdorf player. So I was prepping a little bit of Najdorf. And then I show up to the board, I play e4. And he plays the French. So I'm like, okay, not exactly what I was preparing for, but, I will never say no to facing the French. So, okay. d4, d5. I play knight c3, and he goes bishop b4. So he's going with the winnower French, which is one of 2 ways to go. Black can also play knight f6 in this position, which is the classical variation, but he goes winnower, where the idea is black wants to take the knight, double the pawns, and then trying to go for some wild kind of a game. The winnower is kind of, it's objectively not that great for black. It's actually a very weird kind of positional opening, I almost want to say. Like, it doesn't really make sense from a conventional perspective, but somehow black gets away with it. But actually, it's really annoying to face, and what I've been doing lately is playing knight e2 against it, which is not a very common move. It's a sideline called the Alehin Marakzi Gambit. Another shout out to International Master Miodrag Perunovic, who put out a video on this variation, and I've been playing it ever since, and quite enjoying it. So it's called the Gambit because he can take my pawn on e4, which is the most common move, but then I play a3. And If black really wants to hold on to the pawn, like they can take the knight and then play either knight f6, but then I'll play bishop g5. They can play f5 if they really, really want to hold on to the pawn, but they have a really ugly structure, a lot of weaknesses on the dark squares, so usually people will just accept that I'm going to win the pawn back, as he did. And now this is all theory. I bring out the bishop, and here he played b6. And the funny thing is that in this position, not too long before the tournament, I was looking at this exact line where black plays b6, and I found out that the most ambitious line that white can play is knight f4 and queen g4. Where white you have this pressure against e6, you want a long castle and go for a quick attack. There's actually this very nice game I was looking at that former Super GM Badur Jababa, very creative player, he won in like 18 moves against the GM, just blew him off the board. But for some reason, I don't know, maybe because this was so early in the morning, I convinced myself that this was not the position where I'm supposed to play knight f4, and so I just played queen d2, which is still fine, but it's just not as ambitious of a move. Anyway, he plays bishop e7, I long castle, he plays knight d7. So, pretty standard stuff so far. I have a slight edge. I play knight f4. Idea now is to develop the bishop, and at some point my knight might also go to h5 to harass his bishop over here. He castles, so I play bishop c4. And now he thinks for a while and plays the move which I was expecting, which is e5, right? Because he wants to kind of break things open. He doesn't want to just sit back passively. But I don't want to take, obviously, because then I just basically let him equalize. He brings his knight to the center. His bishop is open. He's attacking my bishop. Can't really say I have an advantage at this point. So after e5, I play knight h5. So I'm pitting the bishop, right, threatening to take. If he goes back, well, now I can think about pushing d5. I can think about a number of things. Basically, I can even play just a slow move, and if he takes, well, now I just have my bishops just aiming at his king. So he, in this position, took on d4, and I took his bishop with check. He took, and I took the pawn. This is all pretty much what I had been calculating. And then he plays the move c5, which I'd also kind of anticipated, but I knew that I have to be very precise here because depending on where I put my bishop, I may or may not still have an advantage. My biggest edge in this position is that I now have the bishop pair, which in the short term and in the long term is good because the position is fairly open and bishops are going to be good in the endgame as well. But for example, if I just go back with bishop e3, he's going to trade queens and just win my pawn on g2. So I can't allow that to happen. I played bishop to e5, which is important because now if he were to take, he has to watch out for me playing rook to g1. And this is a kind of a reoccurring theme in a bunch of positions, throughout the next 5 moves or so, because he wins a pawn, but he helps me open the g-file. And now when he steps back, I just have everything aimed at his king. This rook here, and I'm just going to come in with the queen, and he's just busted. I mean, this pawn is... I'm threatening mate, basically, and on top of that, I'm also hitting his queen. So he can't really take the pawn. And if he were to jump in with the knight, I was just going to sidestep with the queen, so I was pretty confident that I was still better. He decides now to trade queens, and again, he can't take the pawn, basically for the same reason that I'm going to play rook g1, he's going to back up, and then I'm actually going to win his knight because the g-file pin now, right? Can't take my bishop. So he plays knight g4, attacking the bishop from the side. I go back to c3, keeping the bishops kind of aimed at the king. Again, can't take because now he can go back with the bishop to defend the knight, but now I can play this move h3. And he's basically is forced to give up the knight because if he goes back, I'm going to take on g7, he's busted. So he plays rook to d8. And in this position, I decided to trade rooks. A little bit better would have actually been to go rook to d1. I thought that this position was still okay for me, maybe a little bit better. But I wasn't really sure. I mean, it looks like I have some activity, but yeah, I wasn't entirely sure because I thought that, maybe he can defend. So I decided to trade. And this is kind of the critical moment of the game, or maybe we could even say the move before was. Because what I had calculated was that in this position, I played the move h3. which is kind of a strange looking move at first because my g2 pawn is hanging, right? So he can actually take with the bishop. And if I play a rook g1 attacking the bishop, he can take the pawn now. So suddenly I just gave up 2 pawns. But then I was going to play f3. So that when he moves the knight, suddenly I'm aiming at g7. And what I had first calculated was that I take with the rook, right? I mean, very natural. I'm taking the pawn with check. Can't go to the corner because this is a classic well, okay, here it's not really a mating pattern because he can interfere with the bishop attack with the rook on d4. But at the very least, I can just play a rook g3 check. It's a discovered attack, and I'm going to win the bishop. Plus, he actually has to block with the rook, so I'm going to basically just clean him out and be up the rook. If he goes to f8, though, which he basically has to, I calculated that I'm going to take on f7. He goes here. I then take on h7. He takes my bishop. I take his bishop. And I thought, okay, this is slightly better for me, or actually much better, because I have an extra pawn, and if I can trade off the rooks, then this should be a pretty smooth endgame. Problem is, though, what I missed in this line is that after rook takes h7, he has a simple checkmate in 1. So, luckily, my opponent didn't go for this entire line, because, I mean, hopefully I would have realized along the way that there was a problem, but yeah, blundering mate in 1 after calculating all that would not have been good. I mean, that's the things in chess. Like, sometimes you can have all these elaborate calculations and miss something really simple along the way. Turns out, though, that better than taking with the rook, though, in this position is to take with the bishop. Because now I keep my back rank covered, and I'm threatening to move the bishop with a discovered check. And actually, I had calculated this line in the game as well, that he could force a sequence of trades via sacrificing the rook, and then take my rook like this. And then if I take his knight, he takes my bishop. I want to keep the bishop pair, so I go back, and then he saves the knight, and I'm down a pawn here, but because I have the 2 bishops, and his pawns are a bit vulnerable, I'm still a little bit better. And actually, yeah, bishop here is even more accurate, because now I can come back with the bishop, start bringing the bishop, trying to gobble up his pawns, and despite being down a pawn, I'm actually still a little bit better here. Anyway, he decided in this position, he thought for a little while, he decided not to go for bishop takes. I mean, it's risky on his part. He decided to go back to f6. And when he did this, I thought, really? Are you not scared of me taking the knight and doubling your pawns? Like, I thought that he should go to h6 to specifically avoid my next move, which is to take the knight. Because I thought that despite the material being equal, the fact that I double his pawns now, I just created a big weakness for him to defend in the endgame. And now what I played was f3, blunting his bishop. He plays rook d4, activating his rook. I defend the bishop. And now I basically invite a rook trade, right? And he can't really say no, because if he moves his rook out of the way, my rook is going to infiltrate. So we trade. And now we enter the endgame. And if you're sitting there thinking to yourself, man, I don't want to watch this, I don't like endgames, well, you're going to like them after this, because this is actually a really instructive one. This position, I thought, is going to be slightly better for me. Engine says it's about plus 0.3, plus 0.4. White's advantage is negligible. But what black actually has to play is the move f5. Idea being that he wants to create some room for his king to activate, and also he wants to basically fix all of my pawns on light squares by playing the move f4. And basically, even though my king is more active, very hard to prove an advantage. Like, I can sort of pick and probe a little bit, but it's probably going to be a draw. He, though, like fairly quickly in this position, played the move b5. Attacking the bishop, right? He's gaining space. The pawns seems kind of logical. This move already takes my advantage from plus 0.4 to plus 3, which indicates that this is like already basically a game-losing mistake on his part. Now, did I know that this specific move was bad at the time? Not exactly, but when I moved the bishop back, it became clear that my bishop now controls a good diagonal. He can't play f5 now, I mean, unless he wants to sacrifice a pawn. And then he played the move h6, which is also inaccurate, and now my advantage is plus 4 by the engine, which is like basically just completely winning. Now, of course, it's not going to be easy, but I could sense already at this point that, you know, if I can activate the king, and my king is a lot closer here than his is to the center, I might actually have good chances to win this. So here we go. We activate the king, and here's a little instructive move. We play the move b4, because when you have bishops of the same color, you want to fix the pawns on the same color of the bishop. Because what's going to happen now? We trade. For the rest of the game, he's going to be stuck defending these pawns. And if I can infiltrate with my bishop, then he's going to be tied down to the pawns. He's always going to be at risk of losing them. Plus, because he was never able to put this pawn on f5, he's basically just stuck with these pawns sitting here. And this is another set of weaknesses. And he has this split pawn as well. So his pawn structure is just hosed in this position, like so bad. And all I need to do is activate the king and take advantage. So I play king e3, he plays bishop d5, I play king d4, he plays king d6. So at this point, again, like, I'm happy because I got my king to the center, but by no means is this going to be easy. And now, the very important move which I had to spend some time calculating is bishop e4, because if at any moment I can trade bishops and go into a winning king and pawn endgame, obviously that's just the way to go. And if he takes, what I was looking at is if he sacks a pawn here to activate his king, and I saw that I play king f6, he plays king c4, I take, he takes, and I start to push, but he also pushes. And basically we queen at the same time, and I'm up a pawn here, but I'm behind a move, so like it should be a little bit better for me, but it's very unclear, and queen endgames are notorious for being extremely difficult for win, even when you're up like several pawns. So I decided not to go for this whole variation. Turns out though, what I missed is that instead of king f6, what I should play is the move g4. And the difference is that instead of me using my king to take this pawn and then pushing the f-pawn, the faster route is just to create an outside pass pawn with the move h5 and then the pawn break g5. And this is just completely winning because my pawn makes it there one tempo fast enough to stop his pawn from queening. And so I just win. So if I had seen that, I would have obviously played bishop e4. Now, of course, he doesn't have to take. He can dodge, but eventually I'm going to probe. And I don't even need to take this pawn because I can basically just secure this position where I'm going to play h4. I'm going to eventually put all my pawns on dark squares, and then I'm going to win either this pawn or this pawn. He can't save both, because if he defends this one, then my king infiltrates, and I'm just going to take these pawns and win. Like, one pawn is already a deciding factor in these endgames. So because I didn't understand how strong bishop e4 was, because I kind of miscalculated that whole gray sequence, I played c3. Which is still fine, but it's obviously going to take longer now. So he comes back, and honestly, like, this whole endgame I played pretty accurately, but this was my one inaccurate moment. I played g4. The reason it was an inaccuracy, though, is because he needed to find this move. He needed to sacrifice a pawn with f5 to toss out his own doubled pawn and give it to me. And now when I take, he just goes back with the bishop, and he's making it so that my own pawn is kind of in my way. And maybe it's still winning, but it's a lot harder now. He was just kind of sitting, like, trying to, you know, maybe attack here and there. Now I play bishop e4. And he never wants to trade into the king and pawn endgame, because with my king being so active and his pawn structure, again, being so just busted, like, he's not going to survive, so he goes back. I was just started to slowly improve, and then I got a little bit impatient. Time control, I should mention, for this tournament was 2 hours with a 5-second delay. So I wrote +5, but it's really 5-second delay, which means 5 seconds will pass until your clock starts running. And then, you know, you're going to lose time. There's no bonus time, right? So, like, you could get very close to flagging before move 40, which is when you get an additional 30 minutes. Anyway, I already had like maybe 10 minutes at this point or less, and I got a little impatient. I played bishop b7, thinking that I was just winning his pawn because he can't defend it. What I missed, though, was that when I take, he plays king c6, and I had like a mini, my heart sank for a second when I saw this, because I was like, yo, my bishop is about to get trapped. Luckily, I found the one move which saves me, because like if I wait around, that's it. I'm done. Bishop is gone because I can't go to c8. I found the move c4 though. Very clutch move. Because now he's not in time to play this because I'll take his pawn. So he takes the pawn with the bishop, but then I play bishop c8. And okay, we traded pawns, which didn't really help me all that much, but still, my king is much more active and he's still very passive. And finally, the position kind of reaches the boiling point at this position because he makes kind of... I mean, the position was already lost for him, but basically the move which secures the dub in my favor, and that's the move bishop d7. Now, if he had played bishop c4, wouldn't have really been all that different because I can eventually create... Or actually, the funny thing is, I can... If I play g5 in this position, if I try to go for a pawn break, this is a draw. Right, this position is a draw, I have no breakthrough. But if I wait with bishop f5, and now come back with the bishop attacking his b5 pawn, if he takes on g4, then despite, again, this being equal material, this is completely winning for me, because I'm going to eventually queen my b pawn. So if he doesn't take and plays king c6 to defend his pawn, now this pawn breakthrough actually wins. Crazy how the king being over one square makes entire world of difference, because now he's in zugzwang, which means that any move he makes, he loses basically, because my king is threatening to come in and get this pawn, and the only way he stops me from coming in is by moving his king to guard that square, but now he loses this pawn, and he's just busted. So he basically had no choice. He goes back at the bishop, but now I play bishop d5, and the only way he saves his pawn is either playing bishop e8, which he played in the game, or king e7, but that allows my king to infiltrate this way. And again, now he's going to lose this pawn, he's going to lose the game. So he plays bishop e8, and after h5, it is officially zugzwang because he has no moves. Any move he makes, he either lets my king in or he loses the pawn on f7, so he moves his bishop away, I pick up the pawn, and now it's very actually simple for me because I just go back, and now what is the final step to win this endgame? The final step is to queen a pawn. How do we queen a pawn? We have to create a pass pawn. How do we create a pass pawn? We have to make a pawn breakthrough. But we can't rush because if I play f4 here, I drop this pawn, and that's it. My 2 hours of hard work is ruined. So, patient move bishop e2, and now there's actually just nothing he can do. I play f4, and I play g5. And despite the fact that I just gave up a pawn, he cannot stop my h-pawn. Because if he puts the bishop here, I can play bishop d3, and after this trade, my pawn queens first. This is all I had to calculate, pretty simple. He decided to go to g8, but now he has to give up the bishop, and in this position he resigned because his pawn is not going anywhere. My bishop keeps it under constant watch, and he basically has to step away with the king now, at which point I'm going to take the pawn finally and promote it and win. So yeah, that was a very tough, very like technically driven game. Like most of it was just an endgame, which I definitely had to put a lot of mental effort into, but it paid off because eventually I managed to grind it out. So because we lost the previous round, we are now playing a team which is not quite as strong. So my opponent is significantly lower rated now, rated right around 1800. Dude is like in his maybe late 40s, early 50s. I think I actually played him back in the day because I recognized him when he sat down at the board. He in his peak was like maybe mid to high 1900s, maybe even 2000, but dropped off a bit. I mean, as people do, you know, with age or if they don't play consistently. But this game is actually also pretty interesting. He plays e4, I play d6, my typical stuff, knight f6, knight to d7, knight f3, e5, bishop c4, bishop b7, basically main line of the Philidor/Lion. Castles, I play c6, you know, threatening b5, and what white should just do is play a4. He, though, already makes an inaccurate move, which is to take on e5. Why? Well, because the simple reason that he just opened my bishop, which before could barely move. So thanks for that. He plays queen e2, I castle, and his idea was like just so primitive. He basically wanted to threaten the pawn because he has a pin. But okay, I mean, maybe a 1200 is going to miss that. 2000 is not going to miss that, so I played queen c7. He plays bishop g5, and already after b5, I am taking over the game because he has to move his bishop back, right, either to b3 or d3, and I'm gaining queenside space, and I just have a very comfortable game. He decides to go to d3. I play h6, kick his bishop back a little bit, and now I just played kind of a very, seems like a move which doesn't really do much, but I played the move a6. And the reason is because I was anticipating that, like, let's say I play some random move, he plays a4 and tries to break up my queenside, right? And it seems like very logical move is to play b4, but what I learned the hard way through playing many practice games is that a lot of times when you overcommit with this pawn, what white is going to do is they are going to reroute their knight and put it on the c4 square, and good luck trying to get rid of it at that point. Knight's going to be pressuring e5, and you're just going to have to deal with it. So I didn't want to have to play b4, so I played a6 to prepare myself so that if he does play a4, I can just sidestep with the rook and maintain my pawn on b5, where it's actually a lot more effective at keeping his bishop and his knight out of the game. So he plays h3 now, kind of just like a slow, maybe the move is going to be useful, maybe not. I play rook e8 now, and my plan was already that I wanted to slowly kind of improve my pieces and put some pressure on him, I mean, really on both sides of the board, but specifically on the king side. And how am I going to do that? Well, first I play bishop c5, getting my bishop onto this diagonal where I'm pinning him. And he was already kind of so unsure of what to do at this point that he played a move which is just going to seem funny. He played knight b1. Because his knight on c3 is just completely dominated. I mean, it has nowhere to go. He was thinking that at least if I get it to d2, maybe I get it to b3 or f1. But actually, speaking of knights, I also go back with my knight. But my plan is to go to g6, put the other knight on h5, and then put one of them on the juicy f4 square. So he plays c3 now, and we go knight h5, hitting his bishop. He backs up, and knight comes to g6. And yeah, at this point I'm already starting to build up quite some pressure against him because, like I said, knight wants to get to f4. g3 is not a move he can play because, first of all, I mean, he just caged in his own bishop. Second of all, he just blundered a pawn, so that's not an option. How else does he stop me? I mean, it's difficult to do. What I thought was going to happen was he would just maybe play knight d2, I would play knight f4, and he would have to play the very sad move queen f1, at which point I'm clearly better, but at least he's holding on. Also, it's important to note that there is sometimes a tactic in these positions where white plays knight takes e5 with a discovered attack on the knight, right? So like if I take, then he wins a pawn because he wins his piece back. But it doesn't work because I can throw in knight f4. And when he moves his queen, let's say he trades and moves his queen, I just take the knight. And he actually loses a piece, whole thing backfires for him. Right? And if he takes on g6, as I was calculating, that we could get some position where it's like two pieces for the queen. I mean, I have to move the queen here because I have to step out of this attack. But anyway, this is all like theoretical stuff that I was just thinking about. He instead played the move knight h4, which, I mean, I'm just going to jump into f4 anyway. He trades and plays queen f3. And already at this point, believe it or not, he is completely lost. Because the knight which he moved to h4 to open up his queen is now extremely vulnerable. Because it has no retreat squares, and its only square it can even go to is the f5. And so the way I exploited that is by playing the move queen e7. Because what I realized is that if he does go to f5, I can just pick off his knight, take his bishop, and now he is in trouble. Because if he takes the rook, what do I play? Very simple move, pawn fork. If he takes the queen, though, Now what do I play? Same move, e4, because we're going to shove that pawn down his throat and gain some traction. Actually, because this pawn is now in my half, he can't really protect it. I can just play, for example, queen g5, and I mean, I guess he can play queen g4 here if he really wants to, but this position's unpleasant for white. Like, maybe I can even play e3, and how is he going to get his knight into the game now? What he did, though, is actually he hit my bishop, forced me to go back, and now he plays queen g3 because he doesn't want to move the knight to f5. He wants to try to defend it. But this is where, whenever you see a queen and a king like this, there should be a little tactical light bulb going off in your head. Because whenever there's a queen and a king this close to each other, there's often a chance that there's a knight fork. Now, you might be saying to yourself, that knight fork doesn't work because his bishop covers. Well, that's true, but that is why I played the move rook to d8. And try to guess what I have on my mind. He plays the move knight f5, which, I mean, by the way, his position is, again, so bad here, like, he can't really do all that much. I mean, his bishop is paralyzed. If he goes back, he walks into the fork. If he tries to move his king out of the way, I can actually just win a piece by force by taking, and then taking the knight up a piece. So he plays the move knight f5, hitting the queen, but now I take his knight, he takes back, and tactical problem of video. What does black play in this position? Should be pretty straightforward to find because we were gearing towards this moment for the last few moves. It's actually a nice little removing the defender tactic. Rook takes bishop. And I snapped off the bishop in the game and just watched him just like stare at the board like, what did I just get hit with? And he realizes that, yeah, he just blundered a piece, basically. I mean, can't really say he blundered it because it was really kind of the lead up in the last few moves and kind of the inaccurate moves that he had been making that led him to this moment. But now if he takes the rook, I simply fork him and win his queen. And yeah, this position, I mean, it's a queen for a rook, plus I have the passed e-pawn, plus, I mean, look at his pieces. They're not even in the game. So he decided to take with the queen, but I took his queen, played rook d8, and in this position he resigned because, I mean, he's down a colossal amount of material and he's down in development, hopeless position. So yeah, that was a very smooth win, contrary to the previous one, which was like, you know, I had to really grind down. This one was, I mean, obviously it took some thought, but nothing too serious. But I thought it was a pretty nice game. Certainly, like the little removing the defender tactic felt nice to play over the board. So we won that round, our team did. And then on the second, or actually on the last day, the morning round, I actually drew my game against a low-rated player. Was winning, but you know, messed it up. Again, I don't know. Sometimes I played badly, like early in the morning. We still managed to win that round, though. So we were on 4 out of 5 going into the last day, or into the last round, I should say. And despite playing against a team that was higher rated than us, had like an FM and another strong master on the second board, we actually managed to beat them. And in part due to my clutch victory against an opponent who was about 2150. So both myself and the team finished with 5 out of 6. I finished with 4 wins and 2 draws. Team finished with 5 wins, 1 loss. So the team actually finished in, I believe, 10th place overall. And we actually won a plaque for the top New Jersey team prize. I don't know if you can read it, but it says 2022 U.S. Amateur Team East Championship, top New Jersey team. Now, there were a couple of other teams from Jersey that finished like in the top 5, but they won like first or second or whatever. So best state team prize went to us, which is pretty nice. I got this plaque as memory. And because I had a pretty good tournament, I actually managed to break 2100. So yeah, it was a pretty successful tournament for me, despite the fact that I was a bit unhappy having blown like basically winning advantages against 2 players who were like 200 or 300 points lower rated. But no, sometimes it happens. Other than that, I played pretty well. And yeah, 2100 is a nice milestone. I basically, after that tournament, got the USCF candidate master title, which honestly doesn't mean a whole lot. Kind of a joke title, to be perfectly honest. National master is all anyone really cares about, but it's still a nice little milestone, I guess you could say, on the way to 2200. But it's not exactly all smooth sailing, because as you're going to see, there are going to be some tournaments coming up with some bumps in the road, which I will get to in the next recap.